So, we'll address the meaning of the het kuf. The reason why I stalled out with not giving you the exact meaning of het kuf right away is I didn't want to cloud your appreciation of what this word embodied. If you simply look at the letters, and the letters meaning the fence, representing the kingdom of Yahweh and all it contains, and the kuf, which is not only the pillar of fire, pillar and smoke, but like a covering over, like the lid, the mercy seat on top of the Ark of the Covenant, the same picture, the lid of a treasure box, and it's all right in here. The kuf meaning that which was imparted or given to our forefathers, that was taken away, will also be given back. It's the letter that pictures the evidence or the proof of what we believe. When I say there's no evidence or proof, other than Yeshua resurrecting from the dead, and other than the miracles that he did for Israel, he said, let me prove to you that I am who I say I am. And he did the 10 plagues on Egypt, the burning bush with Moshe, crossing through the Red Sea, the voice, the call, the voice from the top of Mount Sinai burning in fire, Moshe and 70 elders getting taken up to the throne room of the heavens, all these things. And he said, this is the proof. These are the evidences that I have touched down in your midst, the picture of the kuf. And when he was not present, and he retracted, you might say, back up into the heavens, I'll read some things what he said concerning that event. It wasn't pretty for the house of Israel. It wasn't anything good for the house of Israel. But he says, I'm going to come back. So we have in the Christian mind a picture of the return of the Messiah. But why is it that the Jews, brother Yehuda, doesn't have that same hope? Remember, the letter Zadi is the hope set before us, but they don't picture the hope of Yeshua coming back. Don't we regard the same scriptures? I wondered for quite some time why they don't have the same hope or expectation that the Christians have. And as we discussed before previously, the reason is because the very same words that we both regard are translated differently. So anybody who reads Hebrew under the teachings of the rabbis will get the rabbis' flavor of the teachings. And they're not going to expect Jesus Christ to come back. The Christians read the Old Testament, translated into Greek, and then into Latin, and then into Greek English, and taught from the pulpit of Christian theologians who tell them they should expect Jesus to come back. And they use the very same Old Testament verses as a proof of who he is. Why don't they agree? It depends on how you render the words. I'm not going to stand here and debate those matters. That's not what this class is about. What this class is about is giving you a mechanism of how to look at the words yourself. In Hebrew, you may come up with something that agrees with the rabbis, or something that agrees with the Christians and disagrees with the rabbis, or vice versa, or you might come up with something completely different. And the question is, how do you know you're right? Now, to look at this simple word, het kuf. Het is a fence. Kuf means after this. It's also the back of a head. It's also a monkey, somebody with a long reach. It's also like a sickle that harvests, so that after this, Reshim Tav, you collect what's your own. Well, that's kind of a picture of the story we've heard about Jesus coming back. I'm using the word Jesus because I'm referencing Christian doctrine. Otherwise, I try to stay away from that word because I'm regarding Yeshua being Yahweh's promise of salvation, redemption, and deliverance to his people. So if I'm talking about Christian theology or doctrines, I can't use Yeshua because it's a different story. If I'm speaking from the Hebrew text, I have to use Yeshua because that's what the word says. Just so there's an understanding, an overview of this. So you look at this and you say, everything in this box, this fence, you see, the picture of the fence is also like a pasture. Just another little piece. You can't see it very well, but there's a green field inside this fence. Inside the Mishkan probably wasn't green grass, but it's a picture type of saying this fence represents the pasture, the sheepfold, Yeshua the great shepherd. This is the sheepfold. This is the combined sheepfold of the whole house of Israel. The two the northern kingdom and southern kingdom come back together. That's also a picture of the letter Het that we drew before, held together by one pin, the nail, the Vav man, the letter Het. Two sheepfolds come together. The point is, this is everything that Yahweh promised to give his people is represented by what's in the Het and his authorization, his validation, his authentication, the confirmation that he is blessing it, condoning it, calling it his, is this covering cloud. When the cloud left, it's because Israel had blown it, not regarded his words, acted profanely, annihilated the covenant, and he was no longer going to be there. So there was no kuf. But when the kuf was there, when the pillar of fire was over the, Yahweh is saying, this is my dearly beloved. Well, wait a minute. That sounds like what he said to Yeshua. Well, Yeshua is the quintessential archetype, iconic image of Israel. And when Israel's doing its right, the same words that Yahweh said to Yeshua is what he has to say for Israel. So it's not wrong to blend the two. It's just that Israel should do what Yeshua did, which was the straight path, Yasar, Israel. Yod, Shin, Resh is Yashar, which is the straight path to authenticate, to confirm. Straight path, El, power, strength, Elohim, translated God. The straight path of Elohim is one way to read Yashar, El, Israel. The unfortunate part about this whole story here is that the word Het Kuf literally is translated commandment. Commandment. Every single time you read the word commandment in the Torah, it's spelled Het Kuf. There's commandments, ordinances, judgments. It's typically Het Kuf, and another word is Mishpat, which is right rulings. But one time, a few years ago, I thought, I got to get to the bottom of this. What is all these great burdensome things that Yahweh puts on his people? These horrible things that we were freed from under the Christian New Covenant. It's this stuff. The Het Kuf. The commandments. But as was pointed out during the break, every one of these 7 letters or 7 concepts of the Mishkan pattern is also represented by one of the festivals. And if these represent the 7 voices, the 7 thunders, every festival is one of the voices and thunders that matches these things exactly. They're the same voice, the same message. And the pattern is in the pattern, like a wheel within the wheel. Yahweh has said the same thing again and again and again and again. And that word that means again and again and again and again, which is also, like the exclamation point, emphatically and repeatedly, is the word Ayin Vav Dalet. Od. Ayin Dalet is the word for witness or testimony, or the evidence that you're doing what you're supposed to be. So, for example, the word Mem, Moed, is a festival. Yod Mem, plural. But the Ayin Dalet, Mem is the place, or the fact of this is where the stuff is. How do you know that you're bearing witness that Yahweh is your Elohim? Because the witness or the testimony, the Ed, is the fact you're at the Moedim. If Yahweh is your Elohim, you show up to the Moedim. If he's not your Elohim, you don't show up at the Moedim. The Moedim are the fact of the evidence being true that you are keeping the witness and the testimony that he told his people to do. The word moed also then means to be for a military unit to be gathered at the place and at the time they were instructed to. That's a moedim, a moed. So the point about this is that what he's embedded in all these words is that if you sit here and look at it, and you might say, well, see the door. Well, the door is a choice. Ayin dalet. What's a door? This side or that side? What's 12 o'clock? Or 9 o'clock? 9 o'clock, it's over. It's supposed to be over. We usually go later. 9 o'clock is the door. Well, 9 o'clock's not a door. A door is a door. No. 9 o'clock is the thing which says you're either on this side or that side. You're either before 9 o'clock or after 9 o'clock. You're either at the appointed time or you're not at the appointed time. That's understanding the door. The testimony, the witness, is what you're at, where you're at, when you're at. That's a moed. And the word ayin vav dalet means again and again, forcefully and repeatedly. There's a couple places where that word is used, and he says, I am Yahweh. There is no other Elohim. The phrase is ein od zulti, and we've talked about this verse once before, but this is the word od, and the word zulti, zayin vav lamed tav yod. Well, zul, zayin vav lamed, has to do with despicable, cheap, it's worthless, throw it away. We were just talking about the word azazel goat that has zayin lamed in it, and it's basically the same root. It means something that you've considered to be worthless. There is no other, I am Yahweh, there is no Elohim, apart from me. This is the word that's translated apart from me. Here's the riddle of how to do this business that we're calling Eriktology or suffering, just in this one word. If the word Zayin Vav Lamed means cheap, despicable, and mean, it's actually Zayin Lamed, because the Vav, you can take it or leave it, and it's kind of like adding a wild card to a hand that you're playing poker with, right? Tav is the sign of the covenant, Yod means my. Zion is the set-apart letter. It's the seventh letter. It's the package, and it's that which says, hey, this is the full package of these 7 things, which is the sworn oath. Lamed has to do with the teaching and learning of the Torah instructions. The teaching and learning of the covenant instructions of my covenant, you guys considered to be despicable, cheap, worthless, and you threw it away. But Yahweh says, Ein od zulti, Ein Elohim. You could say, well, there is no other God. But the word Elohim can also mean power and strength. And what Yahweh was saying is, I've already given you the full measure of power and strength. There is no other Elohim. There is no other power and strength. I've told you again and again and again. The stuff I've already given your forefathers is all I got. It's the best I got. If you think it ain't good enough, you got nothing. Go try to find something else. There is nothing else. And when you return after the 2,730-year curse, you will return to me. Yod He Vav He. I'll read you those verses. They're in Deuteronomy. Chapters 4 and 5 are pretty important. Chapter 10 and chapter 7, we'll read some of those in a few minutes here. What I'm saying is that if you know how to read this Hebrew, all of a sudden this entire treasure box is opened up. And for the Christian church to say, hey, he did away with the commandments. What they're doing away with is everything in the fence covered over by the kuf, pillar, fire, pillar of smoke, which is embodied in the 7 festivals, which is why they don't keep the 7 festivals. The letter Zadi is in the place of the Shabbat. The letter Zion is in the place of the Shabbat. The 2 most important articles in the entire story of the Bible is the crucifixion in the New Testament, the Zion, the Vav Man Zion, and the Zadi, the Ark of the Covenant, in the Old Testament. To do away with the Shabbat, which is represented by these 2 weapons, is to do away with the only weapon Israel was given. Sit down on the Shabbat. That's our strength. If we sit down on the Shabbat, Yahweh comes and whoops our enemies for us. You do away with the Shabbat, Israel's got no strength, and anybody can take over Israel. That's what happened, and it's still the status quo today. The significance of this stuff is that when you see this, we come back to the commandments
And we get everything inside the treasure box. It's a pretty simple formula when you see it. And anybody who says, well, we don't have to, it's like, you're right, you don't have to. You also don't have to partake of anything in this fence, which is everything between these letters. And it's like Yeshua himself, the Vav Man Zion, is the bridge across the moat of the impasse of the washed out, prohibiting access. Yeshua gives us access into the big white fence of Yod He Vav He and everything in there. But we have to keep his words. So I can't run through all this right now, but one thing I did, took quite a few hours, took all day, is I went through the red dictionary and I looked at every single word that starts with the letter Kuf. And you can do this. You get a feel for the concepts. Now, Kuf can find itself in the middle of a word or at the end of the word, but if you just look at the words with Kuf at the beginning of the words, Kumi is Kuf Vav Mem, and it means to stand. It's where we in English get the word combine, combination, commute, to change entirely, communicate, commando, composer, composition, compromise, things being pushed together, convention. If you look at Kuf Vav Nun, it has to do with C-O-N words. Compute, contour, circles, ripples, circuit, which means this full circle coming back. There's one constellation in the sky which has to do, I think it might be the Swan, which has to do this full circle of going to the other side of who knows where, but it's going to come back. It's this concept of the first circle. If you picture this letter Kuf and you realize the message is embedded in the shape of the letter, all these pictures, every word, look all through the dictionary, every word that starts with a phonetic equivalent of C-O-M and C-O-N, all starting to spell with the letter Kuf, are all the things that this letter actually means. There's a picture, Kaf Vav Lamed Yod Tav is actually a thigh bone. Well, see, this is Kaf Vav Lamed, that's voice. Kaf Vav Lamed Nun is, if you have a thigh bone that comes in here and it fits into this pelvis, it's this socket, right? It's this thing. So there's this picture of the 1 and the 0. It's the binary code, 1 and 0. It's a data stream of communicated information. We said at the very beginning, there's two voices of the Hey. This line in this circle, it's also a picture of this binary code. And it's the picture of a leg bone fitting into a pelvis, which is the thing that they say that one of the ideas of what happened to Yaakov, where his leg got disjointed and stuff. It's like, are you listening, Yaakov? You know, there's different ways you can read this. It's also the word for glue, which is to unite together. I could go on and on through this list, it would take too long. But the idea is this picture, the Kuf, has to do with reuniting into one. So you've got the singular and the plural. If Yeshua was standing in front of a whole host of his adversaries, it's also a Kuf picture. There's a male and female aspect in there. There's Kuf Vav Lamed Ayin, which means hitting the mark, fit or accurate. Kuf Vav Lamed Nun Vav Ayin. Kuf Vav Lamed Nun is a tuning fork. Okay, that's vibrating and getting right. It's a voice, Kuf Vav Lamed, with a Nun, and Nun is the one that activates the voice, right? The Nun is the suffix. Nun Vav, Nu means hour, but Vav Nun means putting into a noun form of the one who's doing it, like a carpenter who does carpentry. So a tuning fork is one who puts out a voice. But if you add the ayin, it's the word for a talking movie, a cinematography. It's a combination of the eye and the voice and the hearing. See, Hebrew is just putting together pictures like hieroglyphic puzzles. Kuf Vav Lamed Resh sounds like collar. It's the neck chain for a prisoner. It's a collar shackle. But other kuf words have to do with ornamentation and adornment. If you put a medallion, a medal on somebody, a medal of honor, that's also around the neck. So within the kuf picture, you've got a shackle. If you put the guy's arm in here, right, and it clasps, he's now trapped. But the kuf is also a picture of the shackle being opened up. So the picture of the kuf is that the two messages. If we regard his words, the shackle opens up. If we don't regard his words, we get chained and drug off to the dungeon. Stand up, arise is kum. Stood, fixed, valid, remained, established, confirmed, fulfilled, ratified, kept, preserved, explained, commented, settled, fixed, place, raised up, lifted, erected, built, founded, appointed. That's the word kum, as in kumi ori. Now, what part of that sounds like Yahweh is going to do away with is kuf vav lamed. Remember, the mem is that which is hidden. It's like digging a hole for a foundation and pouring the concrete. You're not going to see it, but the thing that's put into it stands fixed. And the kuf vav lamed is the teaching and learning of the kuf vav. And as we mentioned last week, the verse that says line upon line and precept upon precept, the word line is simply kuf vav. And if kaf basically means his, it literally is saying his kuf. And the word precept is simply zadi vav, which means his zadi. His line is also, if you're doing some kind of art or construction, if you want to make a circle, you put a pin and you take a straight line and you pull it tight and you pull it around it, and it's a radius line, and that determines this circle, this zone. That's a kuf vav. Here's the straight line, and even though it's offset, the idea is you've got a straight line and you've got a circle thing. That straight line radius that forms a circle is what the letter kuf means. The zadi meaning a precept, meaning, I said the word het kuf was commandment. There's another word that he uses all the time, and it's mitzvot. Have you ever heard of mitzvot? Mem, zadi, vav tav. Vav tav, like yod mem, is a plural. So that means the plural of the mem zadi, but mem is the place, the womb, the nurturing, the hidden place. The place where the zadi stuff is the word mitzvot. What's in the zadi? Well, the zadi is the kadosh kodashim, the holy of holies, or the ark of the covenant with the tables of stone, the 10 commandments. Everything written on the 10 commandments, which will cause Aaron's rod to bud, as it were, and the dead stick to come back to life, is the mitzvot. And to think that the mitzvot and the chok are done away with, no longer pertinent, a different covenant for different people from a land far, far away and people long ago that don't exist anymore, is to say that everything that Yahweh says is kum just kind of dissolved and evaporated and is no longer of our concern. The purpose of this class is to re-evaluate, reassess, redetermine the measure of what this stuff really is so that we can regard it, so that we can, by our regard, make these things come back to life. Kuf vav lamed chet is a water hose, the voice of the Mishkan, the voice of the treasure box. Kuf vav lamed, voice, chet, kulach, is a water hose. A flood, you want something to drink? From the kingdom of Yahweh? From the Mishkan? It might feel like a water hose, but it's for those who are thirsty. Kuf Aleph Tav is a pelican. He's got a mouth, the bag, to hold the Aleph Tav. Kuf Bet means hollowed out, a capacity. A wooden leg that's hollowed out to put your other leg in. Kuf Aleph Yod, standing or to be occupied. Kuf He Lamed is an assembly. Kuf He Lamed Tav is speaker, preacher. It's the word Kohelet, which is actually the word Ecclesiastes. We can go on and on. Kuf bet lamed hey is a receipt or receiving. It's also a complaint, or to undertake an obligation by contact. It's actually the word Kabbalah, which is receiving the oral tradition. So you see this picture of the socket and the leg bone going into the socket. There's these pictures of receiving, of gathering, of harvesting, of accepting, of digging a hole, pouring concrete, and standing a pillar. There's an interesting concept. I might have mentioned it once before. The word for standing columns, I'm not sure where I wrote it down, but it's the idea of the kuf and the... There's two different words for something that stands. One is having to do with kumi, but the other one is amad, ayin mem dalet. I'm just going to show you a little puzzle of some English just to kind of play around with this idea. Amad, ayin mem dalet. Mem dalet is like where you get the word made, which has to do with tailored or fit or designed to suit something. And ayin mem is where we get the word for nation or people, and it means with, which is very similar to the word ayin lamed, which is a preposition of reference, like next to, at, above, on, at, aside, concerning, because of, so forth, like that. We talked about that back at the letters lamed, mem, and ayin. So you could say, well, this is made with, but the word amad literally means to lean against, lean upon, persisted, continued, was ready, columns, paginated, something set up. It almost looks like dominoes. And I happen to think the word for the way that we should walk is derek, dalet, resh, kaf. That's the word for way. And upon thinking about this, it's like, wait a minute, he has told us what to do. And as we go through our life, addressing the matters day by day, week by week, year by year, whether we keep the Sabbath day, whether we keep the festivals, it's like, what follows behind this? This is the kuf concept. As you walk, you're leaving behind footprints. But we're not just leaving behind footprints. We're leaving behind dominoes that we stand up. Standing columns. And at a certain point, those things will be knocked over. If we do what Yahweh says, they are fixed in concrete, the kuf picture, and they're not going to fall over. They're like pillars of strength if we simply regard his words. But if we don't do what he says, we think his word's been done away with, the commandments are no longer pertinent, the mitzvot, the hok, the mishvat, they mean nothing to us, then they're like these standing dominoes that, given a slight little touch, and our whole entire life comes apart. Yeshua talked about that when he talked about the wise man who built his house on the rock, poured a foundation, pretty expensive, took a lot of effort and money. But the guy who didn't, the foolish man, built his house on the sand, and when the storm came, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, the house fell over. It was a picture of dominoes. Only they weren't talking dominoes, but the pictures are the same. Well, in thinking about this, I was thinking, wow, this principle of great, profound truth is all about Derek and these dominoes. It's like, wait a minute. Eric Clapton did an album called Derek and the Dominoes. You know, the song Layla was on it, back in the 70s. And it's like, wow, I wonder what that was. Could it be that Clapton was actually thinking of these great spiritual truths that were given to Israel way back then? I was telling my brother, and he quick looked it up on the internet, and he says, that has nothing to do with it. He said, Eric Clapton it was like Eric and the Dynamos, and they were at some club, and the MC tripped over his own word and called him Derek and the Dominoes, and they thought it was kind of funny, so they called the album Derek and the Dominoes. And it's like, oh, well, it has nothing to do with what I just said. That doesn't change what I just said. Our life, whether we regard Yahweh's words, is literally about Derek and the Dominoes. Are you going to set up dominoes which are going to chase after you and knock it down and take you with it, or are we going to set up these standing pillars? So, there's other words. Kuf, zadi, resh has to do with cut, reap, harvest, to cut something short, like the sickle. There's kuf, nun, hey, kona, to acquire possession by a symbolic act. to buy, create, something owned. Al-Kona is one of Yahweh's words. Kuf Nun Aleph means jealous, zealous, envy, anger, passion, fanatic. Yahweh used both Kuf Nun Aleph and Kuf Nun He to describe himself. And if you pick apart those words, Kuf Nun Aleph and Kuf Nun He, again, you could say, well, what is Nun? This is activating the life. The life of what? According to the plan as revealed. Remember, Aleph He, Bet He is the word for love. Aleph He, Yod He is the word I am that I am. And you could say, well, wait a minute. This has to do with how he describes himself, of what he thinks to do and displays. And Nun is the active life, and Kuf is the line, the measure, the target zone. And so he's fanatical about implementing the stuff he said. And if you read through the Old Testament with this in mind, what you'll realize is Yahweh says, I chose Israel to be my very own. And I can't wait to do for my people what I said I was going to do. But I also am going to allow what happens. What will become of them walking away from me, which is all hell falling on their heads. Hell, the word halal, the 8th letter, het, lamed, lamed, means punched holes in, drained out, empty, hollow, profane, common, no regard. A priest deprived of the priesthood. A priest of questionable genealogical descent. Sounds like the story of Jesus. Halal, it's where we get the word hell. The thing is, in Ezekiel 36:23, he says, I will make my great Shem Kadosh, which is to say, like he originally planned on it, when you guys, Israel, quit making my name halal, which you have made halal, amongst those people who you've been scattered across the face of the earth, when you start making my name Kadosh, then I will make my name Kadosh. It's a highly unlikely, remote chance that that's going to happen. That concept, highly unlikely, remote chance, is a kuf concept, the long arm of the monkey. There's another word, memresh het he, or something like that. Almost sounds like America, which means remote, in the distant, future, very unlikely that it's ever going to happen. There are words in Hebrew which says this probably won't happen, or it's very unlikely, or who can even imagine what would have to happen for this stuff to happen. This is what this class is about, I believe. This is what we are all doing by regarding these matters, is making these remote chances of things not happening. We're going to make them happen. We're going to make them happen because we're going to look at Yahweh's words, and he's going to make them happen. And I'll read you some verses that have to do with that. In the book of Deuteronomy, it's an overview. It's a kuf view. You get Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers, and it's this historical account. Then you get to Deuteronomy, Devarim, which is the word words or matters or things, and Moshe says, okay, I'm about to get out of here. I'm about to die, that you guys are going to go into the land. Let me recap for you, kuf view, not only from the past, but a kuf view into the future. Let me recap what just happened over these last few years. And so if we look through some things in Deuteronomy here, if I can find where I wrote it, he starts off, I'm not sure where this verse is, but it says, we don't have time for me to break down every one of these words, but he says, ki aleph yod nun nun yod, which is this word ayin, which means without. It says, Deuteronomy 1:42. He says, tell you what, you guys, go up and you're going to slaughter these people. And they said, no, we don't want it. So all right, forget it, that's it. I'm not going to go up. And they say, okay, forget it. We're just... So they all geared up for battle, and he says, do not go up. I am not with you now. I'm not with you. And they went to go up and fight anyway, And it says the people came out like a swarm of bees, slaughtered the Israelite soldiers, and they came back, and he said this phrase, I am not among you. And then it says velo, and then this word is tav nun gimel pei. Tav nun gimel is an instrument. Nun gimel pei means to be struck, beaten, or smitten, and gimel pei vav means his back, wing, or convex, or turned over, and then lapine, in the face of your enemies. And so it says, well, you'll be stricken by your enemies. But it doesn't say that. What it says is without, and then the word is bet, kuf resh bet. Kuf resh bet means to be among, to be with. So without, with you all, and no, and then there's this word, an instrument for being, for beating the back in the face of your enemies. It's like, it almost it sounds like it's reading the opposite of what the translation is. It doesn't say you will be smitten by in face of your enemies. It's like, because Yahweh is not with you, you Israel, have no instrument for beating the back of your enemies. It's the opposite. You could say, it's essentially the same thing, and it's like, it's not a question of it doesn't mean the same thing. The question is, what does it say? And again, the mechanism of this class is to say, what do these words mean? What did he say? So in reading these letters, I'm just trying to show you, if you know what the kuf means, and you know what the nun means, and you know what an aleph and a hey is, why should it be translated zealous, jealous, passionate? You could say, passionate over what? This word here, kuf nun hey, which is very similar to aleph, the hey and the aleph are very similar letters. This is the revealing of the plan, and it means to purchase or to own something because you bought it, or you did some special ceremonial act. For example, if you see something in the store and you say, I would like to own this, you have to go through a ceremonial act in order to call it your own. You have to take this object, you have to walk up to the counter, you have to lay down some money, and they say, we give you a receipt, we now have gone through this act, you now own this. Thank you very much. So when he says he's Elkanah with a hey, it means he is the possessor and maker of the earth, but he's done some particular act to say, I own this place. So again, I'm just trying to show you different ways to work these letters. Let me read through a few things in Deuteronomy. The big question is, what are the terms of gaining the inheritance, the kuf, that Yeshua would give to Israel, that Yahweh would give to Israel? Chapter 2, verse 43. I'm just going to read through some fast things so you get this overview concept. So I spoke to you, but you did not listen. You rebelled against the word of Yahweh and were willful. That has to do with the time up there on the mountain. You retreated and wept, but Yahweh did not listen to your voice, and he did not hearken to you. The word listen is Shema, and the word hearken is Aleph, Zion, Yod, Nun, same as the word that's in the word Azazel, Aleph, Zion. And see, Yahweh's doing everything that we do. You don't Shema and Aleph, Zion, Yod, Nun? Then I'm not going to Shema and Aleph, Zion, Yod, Nun. And all through the scriptures here, he says, when you guys are willing by your own consent to Shema and Azim, then I will Shema and Azim you. The purpose of this, to look at his words, is simply a matter of saying, how do you do that? How do we do that? This day I shall begin to place dread and fear of you on the peoples under the entire heaven. When they hear of your reputation, they will tremble and be anxious before you. That doesn't sound like it's happening, because we've lost the covenant. Chapter 2, verse 35. There was no city too strong for us. Yahweh Eloheinu gave everything before us. Moses is giving an overview in these first few chapters of everything that's been going on in the rest of the Torah. Yahweh said to me, Al Tira, it means do not fear. He shall wage war for you. And the word Hey Nun Lamed Het. Hey Nun Lamed Het Mem. The word for Lamed Het Mem, Lechem, like Bethlehem, it's the word for house of bread. It's translated bread, but it's also the word for battle. So this is to say impart, right? The action like a lightning bolt, the action of imparting bread. This is where Joshua and Caleb said, we shouldn't be afraid of these guys. Yahweh said he'd whoop our enemies for us. They will be bread for us. This is the word, they will be. Mem ending would be kind of like the they. They will be bread for us. But it's also the word for battle. Join together. There's a picture of if we join together, this is what Yahweh has given us. We have to change our mind. It's not a matter of individual people. It's a matter of doing it together. What I'm saying is that there's ways to read within these words. If you look up the word for Nun Lamed, if you look up for a word for Lamed Het and Het Mem and all these things, this is warmth. The Het Mem, let me just go on, we're running out of time here. Chapter 4, verse 1. He says, now, and then he says some things. He says, listen, perform, live. You will come and possess. He says, do not add, do not subtract to these words. A friend of mine was telling me the other day, he says, the Jews kind of historically, at least, I don't know what they do. I'm not talking bad about the Jews. I don't know any of rabbis that are saying these things, but the general idea is that Brother Yehuda's teachers, let me put it that way, have added things. It's called halakha and takanot. It's rabbinical ways of doing things that are not written in scriptures. It comes through the oral tradition. But the Christians have subtracted a bunch of stuff. It doesn't matter. We're not supposed to. It was done away with. It's under the blood. We have both profaned chapter 4, verse 1. See, chapter 4, verse 5. See, I have taught you. That's the word lamed. Chok and mishpat. That's right rulings. As Yahweh Elohim Zadi Nun Yod, which was instructed to Ayin Shin Vav Tav, to do, Kaf Nun, that's the word can for certainly, truly, thusly. Here's an interesting thing. The word Zion, Mount Zion. You know what that word means? If it's spelled Zadi Yod Vav Nun, again, Vav Nun is one who does, or to put it into the noun form of this is the actual thing happening. And Zadi is his precepts, his commandments on the tables of stone in the Ark of the Covenant that were inside the Kadosh Kodashim, underneath the pillar of fire, pillars of smoke. And this means my. So Zadi Vav is the word for precept, or his precept, and this is the word my precept. And so Zion, Mount Zion, it's the mountain that is those who are simply doing what he said to do in real form. Not theoretical, not just talking about it, not intellectualizing, turning it into dogmas and doctrines and theologies, but doing what he said. Who's the one who did what he said? The only one who did what he said. Yeshua. So Yeshua is Zion. And if all Israel shall be conformed to the image of Yeshua, like I said, you come into the fence, you put on the potter's wheel and turn around and you learn the instructions and nurture what his words are, and you do justice, love, mercy, and walk humbly with him, and you become conformed to the image of Yeshua. Israel becomes Yeshua. Zadi stands alone, though all Israel shall become. It's the words of the song. That's what that's about. That's Zion. Chapter 4, verse 10. Yahweh said this to Moshe. Gather the people to me, and I will let them hear my words. Do you realize how many people have never heard these words? I might have mentioned this before. I think it was the Indians, American Indians from the Northwest. In the 1800s, came to Washington, they sent emissaries, and they said, we understand you have the book from heaven. Will you give us the book from heaven? Our people are languishing. They play this on the radio every once in a while. There's this speech. They were given trinkets and stuff. And they said, our moccasins will wear out by the time we get back to our people. You haven't given us the book. You've given us worthless nothing. And by the time we get back, half our people will be dead. And we have this stuff that we have no use of. We came here from the book of the words from heaven. Did the American government or the people, the missionaries, the preachers, the churches, did they not give these fellows that wanted the words of life because they didn't have them? They didn't understand them. Why didn't they just give them Christian doctrine? Because they didn't want Christian doctrine. They wanted the words from heaven. These words are the words from heaven. For Yahweh to say to Moshe, gather the people to me, and I shall let them hear my words. We wouldn't be hearing this stuff if Yahweh hadn't decreed that we were allowed to hear these words. These words have been hidden and sealed. Daniel was told to hide the words and seal the book until the time of Kuf Zadi. Now it's translated end, but it doesn't necessarily mean the complete end, meaning null, meaning zero, meaning nothing. It literally means the end, meaning the edge of something. If I'm going this way, and all of a sudden I go that way, that wasn't the end of my path, but this is the Kuf Zadi, the change of direction. If you're going the Mishkan pattern and the lateral, and all of a sudden in the Kuf you're going vertical, that's the point of Kuf Zadi. When you're dead in the grave, and all of a sudden Zadi opens up, and it's like, that's the Kuf Zadi of being dead in the grave. There's different ways to read these words. But what he says after this, he says, gather the people to me, and I shall let them hear my words. It was at Horeb. The word Horeb, Bet Horeb, at Horeb, Het Resh Bet means drought, failure, sword, waste, desolate, dry, ruined, spoiled. It's the word Horeb is where we get the word Kerub, which is sword, sharp as a sword. So that they shall learn to fear me all the days that they live on the earth, and they shall teach their children. Chapter 4, verse 12. Remember, this whole chapter is an overview. He talked about not seeing a likeness, only a sound, which is the word kol. Verse 20, he says, he wanted us to be his people, his heritage. Nun Chet Lamed He Nachla. Israel is Yahweh's heritage. He didn't say anything about having a church or some other people or some other congregation or some other thing in the future. Whatever there is to that is a whole other matter that is not a matter of this discussion. We are discussing Yahweh's covenant with Israel. We're not talking about his covenant with the Christians or the Hindus or the Muslims or any other group. The covenant with Israel stands, is fixed, and it says Israel is Yahweh's personal heritage. He will scatter you, verse 27 of chapter 4, he will scatter you, you will be few in number among the nations. There, in the nations where you're scattered, you will serve Elohim that do not see, hear, eat, or smell, as in contrast to Yahweh who does all those things. From there, from the place that you're scattered, serving the Elohim which are not Elohim, verse 29, you will seek and find. The word matzah is find. Mem zadi aleph tav. The place that the aleph tav zadi sprouts back to life is the word to find. What are you finding? The aleph tav. When you find the sprouting back to life from the dead at that place where it's been hidden, in the land that you've been dispersed, there you will find. And he says, you will request, and that's the word bet, kuf, shin, tav, mem. It has to do with ask, quest, search, request, summon, wish, or desire. It's also the word kuf, shin, tav. 3 of the last letters, less the resh, means rainbow, arc, vault, archer, bowman. What are all those things? The rainbow is the promise. The archer shoots something off into the distance. There are all these kuf pictures. At the end, chapter 4, verse 30, at the end of days, you will return unto Yahweh Elheka and Shema Bekol. Hear the Kuf Vav Lamed. Interesting thing. At the end of days, you will return to Yahweh, and you will Shema Bet, the manifestation, the substance of Kuf Vav Lamed. I'm going to show you what the word, picture what that means. How do you do that? Think about it for a moment. At the end, this Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 30. At the end of days, you will return unto Yahweh Elhecha, which is Yahweh your Elohim, and Shema Bekolo. Okay, Bekolo is, here, Shema is Shin. This doesn't show up very well. You will Shema, Shin Mem Ayin, Bet Kuf Lamed Vav. Kuf Lamed has to do with his voice. You will return unto Yahweh. How do you return unto Yahweh? What's the evidence? What's the witness? What's the testimony? What is the sign that you've returned unto Yahweh? This is how it's spelled. Shin Bet Tav Ayin Dalet. Return unto. Now, if anybody's been paying attention during this class, this is Shabbat Ed. Ed is the witness, the testimony. It doesn't say unto. It means until. It's translated typically until, but it's a witness and a testimony. And this is the word Shabbat. But it's translated as the word return. It's because Shabbat means you return to your house and you sit down. But what this verse also says is that the testimony, the evidence that we who have been scattered through the earth have indeed returned unto Yahweh is that we keep the Shabbat. That is the fulfillment of what he said here, Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 30. At the end of days, you will return unto Yahweh, and the evidence is, the witness is, you regard the Shabbat. Verse 34, 4 verses later. Who has ever, any people, has ever had an El who has ever miraculously come to take for himself a people? The word miraculously is Hey, Nun, Samek, Hey. The Nun Samek is the picture of the emblem of the class, right? The orange with the Nun Samek, the life support system. It's the miraculous intervention of the Almighty into the affairs of man to come down and be right with them. Shekinah. The Kuf over the Het. And everything inside of it is Yahweh's personal, miraculous Nun Samek being with Israel. It's also to reveal, and that's to reveal the two Heys. Look, the two voices, the loud voice, the quiet voice. We're running out of time here. For Yahweh, he is the Elohim, Ein Od, that's there ain't no other, and again, repeatedly and forcefully, Ein Vav Dalet, Mem Lamed Bet Dalet, which means beside him, or in addition to him, Met Lamed Bet Dalet. Mem Lamed Bet is inflamed where we get the word for lava, because Lamed Bet is lav, like lava, like heart. The word love. It's also Lamed Bet Dalet, to proclaim as unique. It says, take to your heart that Yahweh, he is Elohim. And the word to take to your heart, similar to this, is Vav, He, Shin, Bet, Tav, Aleph, Lamed, Bet, Kaf. Kaf at the end means your. Lamed Bet is heart. Lamed Bet is also heart, but it's like deep in your heart. Aleph Lamed is motion 2, but look at this. It's translated, take to. Take to your heart. Verse 39, take to your heart that Yahweh, He is Elohim, in heaven above, on earth below, there is no other. What is the evidence that you've taken Yahweh in your heart? It's not that you give a prayer and ask Jesus in. You keep the Shabbat. It's the evidence. You wouldn't keep the Shabbat if you had no regard of Yahweh. Why did Yahweh make it such a big deal? But if you look in the concordance for every place it talks about the Shabbat, you're not likely to see this verse or that verse because it's embedded. The only way you'll see it is to read the Hebrew. And you'll see how important this stuff is. So when you have people saying, what's it matter anyway? He doesn't care. He changed one day to the next. Nobody cares. Nobody knows. We're out of time, but let me show you one other thing. We got 1 minute here. In chapter 7, verse 12, he says, this shall be the reward. That's the coup. This will be the reward. And then you read chapter 7. There's 2 things to show you in there, which is an embedded Mishkan pattern, but we'll have to do that probably next week because we're out of time here. Deuteronomy 10:12, if you know how to read the Mishkan, let me just do that in closing. If I can, we're blowing our time schedule here, but let me just do that real fast. It's a short one. Deuteronomy 10, verse 12. The other one is 7, verse 12. I'll show you the Mishkan pattern. Deuteronomy 10, verse 12. Hear this. Now, O Israel, what has Yahweh your Elohim asked of you? Only to fear Yahweh your Elohim. That's the big white fence. To go in all His ways. That's the instruction of the Torah, the altar of sacrifice. To love Him. That's the labor, the place of nurturing. To serve Him with all your heart and all your soul. That would be the menorah. To observe, to observe the commandments and His decrees. That's the ayin, or the pei would be the mouth, which I command you today, and then the zadi for your benefit. The zadi, the sprouting back to life. Behold, this is the kuf place, after the Mishkan pattern, to Yahweh your Elohim are the heaven and the highest heaven. Raising up. He has the whole thing covered. The earth and everything that is in it, only your forefathers did Yahweh cherish to love them, and He chose their offspring after them. That's us. He's talking about us right here. You, from among all the peoples as this day, you shall cut away the barrier of your heart and no longer stiffen your neck. For Yahweh your Elohim, He is the Elohim of the powers and the Lord of the lords, Adonai Adonim, and the great, the mighty, and awesome Elohim. Goes on and on. The point is, to circumcise is mem lamed. And you could say, well, what is that? That's to nurture the instructions. The word circumcise, to cut away, is to cut away the barrier that's going to keep you from nurturing the instructions. Do you have an attitude? Do you have a grumble? Do you have a complaint? You have to intentionally yourself get rid of the obstruction, anything that would keep you from regarding the nurturing, the caring, the affection of Yahweh's instructions, and all this stuff opens up. The shackle will come off. And I believe where we're at right now in the history of the world is exactly at this place between, well, probably right at the Zadi, because the Kuf is after this, but we're at the place of Kuf Zadi, which is the opening up of the Zadi, the sprouting of that which has been done away with and considered dead. This is the dead language. This is from 4,000 years ago. I heard somebody on the radio the other night talking about Paleo-Hebrew on Coast to Coast, and the guy says, well, they found these lead pages in these tombs in Jordan, and there's maybe 4 or 5 people in the whole world that knows anything about Paleo-Hebrew. They were mentioning the words Paleo-Hebrew. There's more people in this room than these guys have any idea about on the radio. This is incredible stuff. I think we are right at the edge of the sprouting back to life. And remember, like it says, when it happens, it's going to happen like a flood. We should be at the time for the end and some questions here.